Streaming. Right. Should be behind the blue wall. Sure that I haven't screwed anything up here. All right. Oh, we're live because I forgot to put us behind the blue screen. So there's that. All right. Well, hello. Welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about crafting orders in World of Warcraft. But before we do that, buddy, I want to tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast.
On this podcast, we like to play games. And I guess this is going to be like a really crunchy episode, all things considered. For, I guess, sort of the design problem. This really stemmed out of the Derpies, right? Which was last week. And in the Derpies, you highlighted crafting orders as the system that should be great, which is not, which is
Yeah.
bad, right?
Which isn't working, right? It's maybe
Yeah.
a more charitable way of putting it. Right.
Yeah, and so we've decided to sort of balloon that up to a whole ass episode, and we're gonna kind of I don't know, dig into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said that you had thoughts that you thought could blow up into a whole episode. I think I can support that. But since you threw it out there, do you want to start?
Sure. So the first thing I guess I want to do is just prepare people. If you're not a WoW person and you want to
Fair.
understand kind of where we're talking about, here is the system in a nutshell. Okay. So, what crafting orders do is it allows me as a player to bundle a group of materials, right? And then go to a sort of marketplace and list those materials and say, hey, I need a crafter in order to make these, right? So for instance, I might need a belt, so I will get all of the materials of that belt, I will put it on into the crafting order marketplace in one of a couple of different ways, and a crafter will see that on the marketplace and they'll say, ooh, I can do it. They'll select start order, they pick up the materials, they craft your belt for you, the belt gets sent back to you kind of automatically. There's three kinds of crafting orders. You can have public crafting orders, which is anyone on the server, right? Everybody on the server can see these crafting orders, and everyone on the server can fill them. There are guild crafting orders, right? Which is where you go, hey, is there anybody in the guild that can do X, Y, or Z? If so, boom, here's the crafting order. And then there are personal crafting orders, right? Where I can specify a specific person and I can go, hey, Mango, your character Billabong can make the special thing that I need. Okay, great. Here are the materials. Make it for me, please. Right. All of these include a commission, so there is an expectation that the crafter gets paid. The commission is set by the player when they deliver the mats, and the crafting orders like interface with a person's profession and the different new stats that have been introduced in some unique ways, right? So for instance, if I set a crafting order to you and you have a lot of resourcefulness will sometimes restore valuable reagents that get used in the process of crafting something. So maybe your resourcefulness will proc, and even though the mats weren't yours, you get to keep them because it was your resourcefulness that proc them, right? Another stat that's really important is called inspiration, which is essentially like a crafting critical hit. It's just a certain percent chance to craft the item as if you had more, however many more skill, right? And so something that you can do is re-roll an item theoretically, right? Where you submit the same item to be recrafted a couple of different times in a row, to see which one gets this sort of proc. I guess the final piece of that I want to mention is recrafting is also a thing where if I get a belt, but I want to upgrade that belt. I don't need to get you all of the materials to build the new belt. All I need to do is submit a crafting order with new reagents sort of infused into the belt, right? So, for instance, if I get a belt that's item level 386, I can submit it with a different set of reagents in order to get someone to recraft it to make it item level 400, right? Sort of depending on the circumstances uh, of all of that. I feel like that's about everything.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that you don't necessarily have to send the materials along with it, but that obviously makes us attractive to someone crafting because then they have to spend it out of their own resources, and you know material
Okay.
quality and whatnot. But yeah.
Yeah. So, and also to be clear, just when it comes to how crafting sort of works, um, crafting is sort of implemented in order to make high-end crafted gear something that is like desirable and capable for players. So this has always been sort of an issue and a question in WoW. Players don't want you to be able to just buy the best gear, right? But in traditional circumstances in World of Warcraft, crafted gear has to be listed on the auction house. It's really the only marketplace for it, right? Either you take a so for instance in Battle for Azeroth, this is how blacksmithing worked. If you were a blacksmith in Battle for Azeroth, you could craft yourself really, really good pants, right? You could craft the best quality pants and belt, and it was really useful because you could guarantee the secondary stats on those two things, right? In order to make sure that you were crafting something good, but it was soul bound. You couldn't sell it for a profit, right? Um, and in Warlords of Draenor, right, there was crafted item on the auction house, or there were crafted items on the auction house, but you could only equip 3 crafted items at a time. So maybe you go out of the auction house, you buy 3 crafted items at the highest possible gear level. Well, that's great, but you also need the rest of your gear in order to sort of like fill that out. The idea that somebody walks up to the auction house and they just buy a complete set of gear has always been one that the World of Warcraft community really balks against, right? They don't like the idea that anybody could just sort of essentially sort of pay cash in order to have the best gear in the game. Work orders get around this because when I submit my materials to you, some of those materials are soulbound to me, which is not a functionality that like has existed in other sort of places. Soulbound means that I can't trade this. It is bound to this individual character. But because through the crafting order menu, I can put a soulbound reagent in there, it means that I can be going and doing bosses, right? I can be doing really hard content in the game. Those bosses drop these soulbound reagents, and then I bring them to a crafter in order to have them make the item with those reagents. Um, this means that in order for the person to get the highest level crafted gear, they do have to put a certain amount of the work in, right? In order to sort of get that end goal payoff, right? So I guess okay, that is everything about crafting that I wanted to that I guess I wanted to explain up front. Since you sort of had what would you say is your base problem with work orders?
The fundamental problem with work orders is that um, nobody puts them up, right? And that seems to be a bigger problem. Maybe this is a bigger problem for engineers, although we do have head pieces and wrist pieces, right? So we do have things to craft for people. Um, and there's also like little things or like random things like Petzer and like the soul capture thing.
Mm,
Um, and like fishing and like professional equipment. But it seems like not a lot of people are putting them up. So much so that one, I've got like our guild has like a handful of engineers that are just like trading recruiters with each other to get the weekly done. And two, I saw actually last week some guy put up like 4 or 5 orders for like bolts that he's like with like minimum, like he put up the mats too, and he's like, if you need to get your weekly done, just do this, and it had like a 5 gold commission on it, right? Like, so and the only reason that's happening is because there's a weekly tied to it with your profession thing, right? If that wasn't important, then people wouldn't bother doing that. But that is like the end state problem. But I think that like there's several systemic things that lead to this being the case. Some of which you have identified previously, which is stuff like people only want to ask for the best crafted gear, and you can't get there unless you like work in between, right?
yep.
And that's the thing from so fundamentally what I think the system is trying to do is back in the day, back in the good old days of Classic, that are like the halcyon days that kind of really didn't exist the way we imagined them to. Which is the thing we talk about, right? Like
Yeah.
you would spend hours, and this isn't just in WoW, right? I did this in Guild Wars. I've done this in several different games. You would stand in your town and you would spend hours maybe trying to sell stuff by spamming the trade chat, right? And I say spamming, but like this is how you did it, right? Every once in a while, you'd stand in trade chat, or you stand in the city, and the trade chat you would say selling this, or I can craft this, or whatever, or I've got this for sale, right? And this was the only way because this was pre-auction house, or like I think there were more limits on the auction house back in the day, and like some like like I said, Guild Wars, there wasn't an auction house, and so you just stood in town and tried to sell dies, which is what I did. Um, uh, but and some of that has like this like great player interaction component, right? You meet people, you talk to them, right? You build a community. You get a reputation. You get reputations on the server, right? Like back in classic, right? When classic was WoW, right? You would like know people on your server, and they would have reputations for being particularly good, for like being scammers or whatever, right? All that good stuff. And I think they want to bring some of that back. This is a thing, just like isn't compatible with modern quality of life changes that they've made to the game, which I think on balance are good, but you end up losing that kind of like server reputation community aspect, right? Unless you like are digging for it. Like the only way you get that is if you join an active guild like we have, and you have your own community, but it's not like this organic bottom up community that you used to get in like the old MMOs, right? And I think crafting orders are very specifically designed to kind of try and bring some of that back, right? Public orders, you can't specify a quality. Specifically, I think because they want you to get something crafted on a public order and be like, Bear did a good job with my helmet. I would like to reach out to him directly and get my artisanally crafted, shoes, right? Like, and I think that is the objective, and it's not working. And that again, that might be because we're on a tiny server, but it just seems to not be catching.
No, I will say this is a problem that I'm seeing all over the WoW community. I don't think it's just rooted in our server specifically. I have friends on Emerald Dream, which is a much larger server, where this seems to continue to be a problem, and like larger discourse has been happening, in all of the other sort of WoW community spaces that I have historically hung out in. So yeah, I would definitely say that that is an issue. So on the podcast last week, I mentioned that I feel like this is a supply and demand problem, right? Which is that crafting orders flip the supply and demand that have. So yeah, I think here's what I think happened. I bet whatever designer came in to do this, right, basically said, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to look at the way people use the auction house, right? And I want to reverse engineer that a little bit in order to build this system that suffices the condition that I had created in the previous, you know, uh, when I was talking about how people don't just want to be able to buy your gear, right? You have to create a system that allows buyers and sellers to meet with one another that includes the ability to use a buyer's soulbound items in order to craft the piece of gear in the first place, right? Which means you can't use the auction house. On the auction house, you cannot sell soulbound stuff. I would not be able to sell a soulbound item on the auction house. Therefore, I'm gonna need to find a situation where um, my buyer comes to me with his soulbound stuff, and I use his soulbound stuff in order to craft this item sort of specifically. So I think that was one condition, right? And they settled on this system of crafting orders also to fulfill this sort of like social component. This is what I'm expecting happening, right? And I bet that they looked at the way that the auction house works, which has a very hardcore sort of supply demand dynamic, right? Where generally speaking, the supply and demand, is it is a stable economy, if not necessarily always the best economy, right? For instance, awakened orders are worth quite a lot. There's low supply, and high demand. Awakened fire, there's less demand for that, right? Um, there's a much larger supply. But at the end of the day, if you need awakened orders, you can always go find them. If you need awakened fires, you can always go find them on the auction house, right? We have not collapsed, the fundamental economy of the game, because there are still hundreds of thousands of awakened order being listed on the auction house at any given moment. It's just a matter of what price for those is sort of fair, right? Because crafting orders have sort of reinvented this wheel a little, um it has flipped the relationship between supply and demand that used to favor the crafter quite a lot, right? I famously made millions of gold in Shadowlands because I was a crafter who could craft every single legendary item in the game at the max possible quality, right? Which required a really heavy gold investment for me at the time. I had to put in a lot of gold in order to get to those max quality, legendaries. But once I had them, I was essentially printing money because everyone needed those. Everyone needs a the perception at the time is that these pieces of gear were mandatory, right? You could not play the game unless you were using um a super high end legendary. And the perception at the time was also that um it was really hard in order to make those legendaries, which was true, right? Because it required this really huge sort of upfront this really huge upfront investment. And because we're using the auction house where I as the buyer list the item and I list it for a price that I choose, and the seller really, that they just take the lowest on offer between multiple sort of buyers or whatever, I get to set my profit margins. If there is nobody else on the server who can do this thing, I list it for 100,000 gold and I get paid 100,000 gold. I listed in the very first couple of weeks of Shadowlands, the very first legendary I ever made, I did not make for myself. I made it for the auction house and I listed it for 400,000 gold and somebody bought it, right? Which is an insane price, right? But it's all profit. It's pure profit, right? Because I get to set that. Crafting orders reverse that relationship because it is the seller who lists the item that they want crafted at the commission that they want to craft it at, right? For instance, the commission that I have asked for most people and that I offer to most people, right, is 2,500 gold, which is much slimmer, profit margin compared to what I was doing in Shadowlands. In Shadowlands, I was making tens of thousands of gold per legendary I was selling. And I was selling multiple legendaries a day, right? Um, and this relationship means that all of a sudden now if you are the holder of a profession, you're really not actually making the money. The way to make money in Dragonflight is to just input materials at the bottom of the system, right? As you process the materials, they are worth less and less money, which is a weird phenomenon. But it's because the other thing that was different about Shadowlands was the investment required was all gold, right? The amount of the investment required in order to make that super profitable rank 5 legendary was about 750,000 gold, 500,000 gold sometimes, depends on when in the expansion we're talking about it, which is just buying the materials, right? You just have to buy a huge amount of materials and then craft all the way up to that rank 4 legendary and just sort of put the rest of them in the garbage because they're never going to sell, right? Um, in Dragonflight, the investment is time because all of the power comes in these knowledge points. The knowledge points are gated weekly. They're gated by weekly quests. They're gated by farming a resource for a bunch of times or whatever, and all of that. And all of that stuff and all that kind of thing. And I just think that there are way more people who are willing to invest time into the game than there are willing to invest money in the game. And all of those things have created this really insane supply and demand problem. There's not a lot of demand for crafted gear. There is there is a huge supply of people who enjoy professions and they want to level up their professions and they want to use their professions, but they have nothing to use them on because there just is no interest in actually using crafted sort of orders. Jesus Christ. That was like 80 minutes of talking. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. So I've got a couple of thoughts coming off of this.
Sure.
Because so one, I think supply and demand isn't quite right, but like effectively, I think what you're getting at is that the supply of crafters has increased, right?
Yeah.
And so I think a problem that I think part of this is intentional, right? Like you said, you were making money hand over fist because you had the gold to invest at the beginning of Shadowlands, right?
Mhm.
Like this is like rich get richer type stuff.
So to be fair, actually, that's technically untrue. I started with about 75,000 gold at the start of Shadowlands because I just bought the Brutosaur. Um,
Sure.
at the end of Battle for Azeroth, I spent all of my money on the Brutosaur, and I basically had nothing in Shadowlands. But it was truly that first pair of pants at 400,000 gold. That was basically all profit, and I just went into further legendaries. And as I started making more and more legendaries and selling them for a profit, it just snowballed from there.
Yeah. There's that aspect, right? There's like a rich get richer thing that I think they want to solve with that, right? Like they don't want that to be. They want anybody to be able to kind of enter this market. Second problem: there's not a good mechanism for crafters to enter their pricing information back into the thing, right? If somebody puts up something with like a 50 gold commission on it, right? There's no way for the seller like the seller, I guess, could look up the name and like PM them and be like, hey, I'll do this if you didn't offer me like a shit price, right? But there's not a real incentive for that to even work, because one, that's effort. Two, maybe somebody else will pick it up for the shit price. And I think this is the third part of that. Is that the weekly means that there are people willing to do things for shitty commissions, right? Your extra knowledge point is worth a bunch, right? And that's what you get from fulfilling like they dropped it from 5 orders to 2 orders because there aren't enough orders on the marketplace or whatever. But that is worth enough to players that they like. Whereas otherwise, you could just ignore crafting orders, right? And just like not make money or whatever, right? Like if you have a reason to do it, you'll go and do it even if the margins are slim because you've got a reason to, right?
Yep.
So I actually think that weekly is like super destructive to the market on its own in a weird way.
That actually is really insightful, and I don't know that I've ever heard it before, but I think I agree with you. I think the weekly is one of the bigger issues. I mean, like the barrier to completing a crafted order is already tiny, right? So
Yeah.
for instance, I actually have 2 crafters at max, right? I have both Baron and Tonrik at 100 blacksmithing. But I still complete orders on them, and the reason why is because why the fuck not?
Yeah, even if it's 5 gold, it's still 5 gold, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. All it requires me to do is to just check my work order thing. If there's a public work order, even if it's 500 gold, even if it's 1,000 gold or whatever, that's all profit, right? All I need to do is click start order and then create item and then complete order. It is 3 button clicks and 10 seconds of time in order for me to make that amount of gold, right?
and if you've got high resources, this you can even like get gold value in mats out of it, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. And because there's no barrier for me to fill that order, someone else who needed the skill ups and was looking to do it could not find it, right? Which is sort of an issue. Yeah, I think I might describe the reason why I think this crafting order weekly is bad, is because I think in the proper water finds a crack way, right? The proper way to do it is to just list it to yourself, right? The first thing I do on reset is I go on Bairn and I list crafting orders for all of my alts so that they can all just complete that work or that weekly quest immediately, right? And with negligible mats for the item that is the cheapest mats, which for me is generally like bracers or something, right? And that's it. Like that's
yeah,
all, and that's all I'll even think to care
and
about.
if it's not alts, right, or if you don't have alts, like I said, our guild has like an engineering consortium that just like
Yeah,
sends each other orders for bolts, right, which are items that we can use, right, but they're also like 3 severate ore a piece or whatever, right? So
yeah.
easy peasy, right? um uh but so the other thing that occurred to me as you were talking about this is something that I suspect is another design goal of this system. Why you don't want it on the open auction house beyond like the kind of like pay gold to win thing. This basically gets rid of this and the kind of cross server materials thing gets rid of um like eliminates the financialization of the system, right? Like if we compare this to the real world, right? Like there are people who trade stocks, right? Like professionally, they don't put anything super constructive into the system, right? They're making money off of like trading value, right? And that's something that can happen in WoW. Obviously, it's at a much different scale, and there's not really real, or maybe there is a real money concern involved, like a gold farming concern involved. But like we used to talk about this, right? You buy out the mats when they're low, and you relist them as high. I'm not like if I last expansion, I saw like some mats going for way under market, I could buy them and relist them at the higher cost, right? All I did was make money. I didn't go collect resources. I didn't add any value to that process. I just made myself some money because I could play the market, right? I guess the service I provided was liquidity to someone who wanted to sell their mats cheap rather than try and get like a market price for them, right?
Yeah.
Which, maybe has some value, maybe more in the real world. definitely not in World of Warcraft, right? Like that is like basically useless to everyone.
Yeah, in
Uh,
the real world, I would actually argue that that's actually a
the-
very good thing
yeah,
economically speaking, right? Like
yeah,
the foundation of the modern economic system is based on the idea that a bank can both store your money but then also lend out money in order to create margins for profit that are like that's a good thing, right?
yeah,
That's fine.
yeah,
But
yeah.
in World of Warcraft, it makes zero sense to have anything kind of along those lines. In fact, it actually kind of makes negative sense because World of Warcraft is not a zero sum system, right? Where you like the whole game is predicated on building value out of literally nothing. I go and I kill a mob and it drops gold for me, right? That is that it just
Gold from the
gold
ether, right?
evaporates. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, right? Or you know whatever. I'm a gatherer and I fly around and there are mining nodes. Those mining nodes, I'm just gonna I mine them. That's pure gold. That's
you,
and this is what I'm saying
you
when I
can't
say the best.
deforest, you can't strip mine Azeroth, right? Like there will always be
Exactly,
more
exactly.
ore.
And nobody owns those nodes. It's not like I need the prospecting. I need to pay someone for the prospecting rights to the nodes in the Waking Shorts, right? I just fly down, mine it, move on, sort of thing. And so yeah, it is definitely a very different financial system. And I do think that this is maybe where I will risk a controversial opinion. I think I would have a lot of friends who would shit on me for it. Like I have a lot of friends who do give me guff, right, for the way that I played the auction house, for the way that I did legendaries in Shadowlands. I listed them at big, sort of profits because realistically, like if you're the kind of person who hates Elon Musk and Jeffrey Bezos because you have certain political beliefs about billionaires or whatever, I am the WoW version of a billionaire, right?
Yeah.
In that situation.
Well,
People need legendaries in order to pay the game, and I am milking them dry in order to sell them to them. Right?
I was
Um,
so like selling legendaries. You're at least like an Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. If like if as like someone who's just playing the market, you're like you're like Goldman Sachs or like
yeah,
or like
yeah,
Warren
yeah,
Buffett, right? You are literally just trading like equities. You're not actually
yeah,
like at least you're making the legendaries in that case, right? Like
yeah. True. But like, there's a certain amount of people who would say that I am stiffing, the little guy
yeah.
essentially. By charging exorbitant prices for this stuff. And I would argue my prices were not all that exorbitant, and whatever. Like
Hey,
part
what the
part of
market
the
will bear, right?
first of all, anything the market will bear, and also secondly, I also did not pay it. Like I did not charge any of my friends. I basically kept the entire guild, kitted out in the best quality legendaries at no profit to myself because I gave them away at cost. Um, so rigorous was that system. I had a whole spreadsheet where I could just tell someone the exact amount of gold I needed in order to make the legend, like buy all the mats on the auction house and make the legendary, kind of myself. But I would actually say that first of all, I don't think that the politics matter at all because it's a video game,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I am not buying and selling people's livelihoods, right? The housing market is not going to default based on my actions
Right,
or
right.
whatever. Like this is a video game, and in the sense that it's a video game, part of it is about finding the fun. And I would argue that was really fucking fun. And making 18 million gold over the course of the expansion was a very fun use of my time, and I liked it quite a lot. Um,
Yeah,
and
no,
I think that that's a very valid way to have in a greater, bigger picture. It's a very valid way to have fun, right? I think a lot of 4X games, city builders, right? All of these are similarly built on those kinds of principles, right? I wouldn't necessarily want like okay, a 4X game being kind of like a political engine. I don't want a single person in charge of my politics, obviously. I want democracy. I think democracy is good, right? But for the purposes of having fun playing a video game, you want to give that person as much dictatorial power as they possibly can have in order to, expand their empire and participate in conquest, right? It's the same sort of principle. Um and I feel like I have been sort of directly attacked by this work order system, right? There is a category of players who used to have fun by managing sort of the markets of World of Warcraft, but I no longer really have that option because of the way that crafting orders have so thoroughly flipped the buyer seller relationship, and entirely favored sort of the seller.
yeah. No, I mean that makes pretty perfect sense to me, and I think I agree with you, right? Like I agree that it's perfectly valid to want to play the game that way. What I don't not that I don't. Um, it just seems to me like that's like a thing that they were targeting with this, right? Between this and the crossover mats, there's much less room to do those kinds of arbitrage games. Which I agree
Yep.
with you. I used to have a lot of fun doing that too, right? Like that's what I used to do in Guild Wars, right? Is I would literally like jump between instances and find someone selling like a die that I knew I could get more for and like sell it high, right? And there was fun in that, right? That's also what I like to do in Eve whenever I, hate myself enough to put 20 hours into it to remember that I hate it. But like that stuff can be fun, but it seems like that's what was targeted, right? Like, and like I said, maybe some of that is like the people a lot like there were a bunch of people who were doing this that were gold farmers, right? And like maybe they wanted to put a tamper on that, but like yes, that directly hurts that kind of thing. But I don't think the work order system wanted to hurt you as the legendary crafter, right? They wanted
Yep.
to hurt you as a stock market player, right?
Yep.
Or the auction house player, I guess is the better way to put it. I just think this is so. I think part of it, I think it's also like it's a vicious cycle problem, right? Last week, as Arahe said in the chat, right? Like part of the reason why work order, like she doesn't want to put up or didn't want to put up work orders, is um is to what's it is because they don't know what an appropriate commission is, and part of
Yep.
that is because no one else is putting up work orders, so you can't get a consensus price on it, right? Like, um, that combined with the inability of crafters to put like information back into the system, right? Like, um, I mean, it would even work if like a craftsperson could put up like a work order that was essentially like it was like a contract on the auction house and let people bid on like how much they would pay for it, right? That doesn't work perfectly with like the guaranteed quality aspects of it, right? Like, um, excuse me, because like you can't like if you're relying on an inspiration proc, you can't guarantee a certain quality or whatever. But um, it just again, I think the primary thing this was supposed to facilitate was like people talking to each other again in the game instead of just kind of like logging in and like doing their stuff. But I think it's largely a failure in that regard.
Yeah.
And it's
So
such a
the
neat system
interesting
too.
thing. Okay. So the interesting thing, I think we've kind of hit on one interesting sort of solution, right? Which is that the weekly is a bad driver of incentives, right? It creates not so great incentives for folks to engage with the system appropriately, right? Um, because the best way to deal with that is to do the thing where you just send a bunch of dummy orders to yourself, and at that point, really, what you're doing is sort of like I guess I just think that this is the easiest indicator that the system is not working as intended, right? If the best way to sort of handle things is to just not even engage with public work orders or anything at all, and is more or less just to sort of farm them out to yourselves at some sort of like negative profit for the because the specialization points like matter a lot to you. um but I think the interesting thing that they could do in order to sort of alleviate some of this pressure is to make dummy work orders, right? Which is to say, in the same way that in Hearthstone, right? In some of the very lowest ranks of Hearthstone. So, okay, to explain this, when Hearthstone, when you first start Hearthstone now, as a completely new player, you get 25 ranks of sort of tutorialized play, right? Before you hit the actual sort of bronze, silver, gold, platinum sort of progression, right? Um, and in those tutorialized ranks, you are playing against other new players who don't have a full collection, who are, relatively like unskilled, right? So that there are not just like people at high legend like fucking farming new players, right? And one of the things that the Hearthstone team will do is if there aren't enough players in that pool, they will essentially list dummy players who are bots who will play with reasonable decks, right? And about as good. And in most instances, you don't even necessarily know that they are a bot. But you play these bots in order to in order to fill out the queue times, that kind of a thing, right? Because there isn't a huge influx of new players to Hearthstone, in the same way that there is with established players. I feel like if I was at Blizzard and I was designing a solution, the first thing I would do was I would just want to start creating public work orders that are fake, that are like these dummy work orders for simple items, that would allow people to complete their that would allow people to sort of like complete their quest a little bit more painlessly, right? So that you do have a little bit more of that. Here's a big stack of work orders that are going out, and some of them would be public. And if I really did it correctly, I would actually want some of them to be personal, right? Like I sort of like the idea that maybe twice over a week a bot will reach out to you and essentially hit you up for this sort of like fake work order. But the problem is with that as a solution is, what do you do with the commission, right? Because if you include real prices with that, like real gold with that, you're all of a sudden injecting a ton of gold into the
Yeah.
system, um basically kind of out of nowhere.
So, okay, so some ideas that just popped in my head. Um, you have it be personal work orders from lore characters, and the commission is like an item, right? Like a special kind of
Oh, interesting.
like it's dragon supplies, or it's
Yeah,
like,
that's what I was gonna say, is that it is Dragon Isle supplies. It's not gold, right?
yeah.
Something
Um,
that has value, but not, the same level of value that straight gold does.
yeah. I mean, at that point, I think you just eliminate the weekly, right? Because like the point of the weekly is to drive people to the system so that it happens, right? And if you're putting out fake orders, then you're kind of defeating the purpose there, right? Like
Okay,
maybe,
so here's another interesting question though, because I would actually argue that even without the weekly, I would want this system in place, and the reason why is
sure,
because I think people deserve skill ups, right? If
sure.
people want to be able to scale up their thing, using a crafting order system sort of facilitates that. There you go.
Yeah, no, I actually think that's one of my problems with the crafting system is Billabong is not maxed out at engineering yet because I don't have like the mats to kind of like craft the things that like will give me skill ups right now. Like the things that will give me skill ups right now are like things that require artisan's metal, which
Yeah.
I don't have excess of, or things that require flash of inspiration or whatever the epic item is. And I've got like three of those, and I'm saving them for like when I need them for myself, right? Like
Yep.
I'm not just doing that to skill up, right? Like, um, and so I agree with you from that perspective, right? Like having these things so that you can at least skill up a little bit. Honestly, the Dark Moon Fair is the one that's like been the most useful for me for that because like
True.
that's like the closest thing you get to that. But you could do it that way. I think another big problem is that there's no way there's like no good way to establish pricing information, right? Like cuz it's all buyer offered and the buyer doesn't even know, right? Like, you know, how would the buyer even know what an appropriate commission would be, right? And depending on the player, right? Like you're Timmy and you play like once a week, and you've got like a max, after like 7 months in the expansion, you get like a max level character, and you've got like 100 gold to your name. It's like, I will offer them 50 gold, and that is 50% of my gold, and therefore it is a very big tip, and they should be grateful, right? Like, how does that person even know that that's like not correct, right? Like, and obviously I'm exaggerating with the amounts there, but like there's like the auction house. This is a very free market thing, right? Like the existence of the market provides the pricing information. This market doesn't act like this doesn't actually function like a functional market because there's no way to like to the information doesn't the information is constrained, and it can't escape the kind of like
Yeah, I think if I were going for the highest sort of scope version of this, what I might do is create in almost an entirely new board inside of the crafting order system, which would be a publicly listed essentially directory of craftsmen on the server, right? Imagine that you could walk into a building and you could search some sort of registry that said, okay, show me every blacksmith on the server sorted from, you know, best to worst, or whatever. Like
Yeah.
it has 100 skill all the way sort of like down. And in there you could include, right? So like at the top of the list you might see Baron Ravenhold, right? And I might have a little blurb, like a little bio. And in my bio it says, "Hey, I am a specialized legs person. If you need Frostfire legs of whatever, I can guarantee those at rank 5. Um, you know, these are my prices." Sort of like putting up like a little sign, right, that says sort of all of those things. But even that as like a sort of like outside of the idea that that would be insane scope, right? This is the kind of thing that they would maybe have to do a whole expansion cycle, in the way that crafting orders took a whole
Yeah.
expansion cycle in order to be sort of set up. It has this insane level of scope. Um, but it would also not really deal with sort of the supply problem, right? Which is that, well, at that point, all people will do is sort by whoever has the maximum blacksmithing stats and give that person all of their business, right? Once you are, it's sort of like this, it's sort of like the Steam algorithm or something else like that, right? Once you are the number one in your field, you continue to be number one because the most searched person for this thing is going to be you, and everyone is going to default to you because you are going to get them the best sort of stuff, right? There is very little incentive if you're 20 spots down from the top of the list, right? Maybe there's a certain amount in the top 5, top 10, right? This was something that also happened with legendaries, where there were a couple of us on the server. We could all craft the legendaries. And we were listing them. We were undercutting one another, so at any individual time anybody could sort of pick up one or the other. So maybe you'd have a little bit of that, right? At the top of the list we're charging premiums, right? Maybe you drop down a little bit down the list in order to, right, like get a better price, in order to get a cheaper price. But even then, how far down do you go? Do you go to somebody who has less than 100 blacksmithing skill? Probably not. Do you go to somebody who doesn't have maxed out blacksmithing gear, right? So for instance, on Baron I have the black dragon touched hammer or something like that, which is an epic drop that drops from a rare. I paid a lot of money in order to get the mats for it. I have a very good version of it, so I have a really high inspiration. My inspiration proc on Baron's like 34%. Well, if somebody can see my inspiration proc rate, which I kind of think that they should, by the way, that means that they are incentivized to go with me over every other crafter, because like on average I'm gonna get them the best stuff. And to a certain extent I think maybe that's fair. And in the same way that we have leaderboards in World of Warcraft for the best Mythic Plus player on the server, we maybe have essentially leaderboards for the best crafter on the server. But I don't actually think that would be a satisfying system for people, right? I think that for a lot of people who are sort of just like middle of the road, that this would just end up frustrating them even sort of more.
Yeah. I think I think part of it too is what was I gonna say about this? Well, I think honestly the solution has to be just like go back to the auction house model, right? Like let people who give a shit enough to like make it work, right? Like I think that's the only way you solve this problem in any sort of like satisfying way. Um, Interestingly, I think a way that this might be kind of going is I've seen people in Veldraken in the trade chat advertising what they can do, right? Like, and so like maybe this is just a backdoor way to get back to that place where like instead of like shouting what they can sell, they're shouting their skills and they're like getting people to like whisper them and like make orders. The other thing that I was gonna say, I think the issue is, and this is just an issue with video game crafting as like a thing, is like the reason this works in the real world is because individual pieces of things are not identical, right? Like if you and I are both, let's say you and I were real blacksmiths, right? Like, and you commission us, each of us, to make a sword, right? We're gonna make different, like, slightly different things at best, right? Like, even if we're trying to imitate each other, right? They're gonna be different, right? And someone can look and say like, I trust Mike, right? Like I trust Mango to make a good sword because I have worked with him before and I know he does good work and I trust him and he's local and I'm willing to give him my money. And that's why, they don't go to you, even though you might be just as good theoretically. It's like, maybe they like, my style better than your style, or maybe they like your time, like, your speediness of work better than me, right? None of that can be expressed in a video game because like, that's like the vagaries of real life, right? And that's why this works in the real world, why this kind of thing works in the real world, and why it kind of doesn't work in a video game. It's there's no differentiation between something that you make and something that I make in the game. And it'd be interesting,
Yeah,
like,
so my dad is like the king of this stuff, right? One of the things that we did when I was back home, uh, is he got me these like little teacups. And I'd never seen them before, but they're little ceramic teacups, right? And on the bottom they're signed, and I can't even really see what they're signed by, but like I know that there's some craftsman out there, right? Who I eventually learned was probably from Japan. Some Japanese craftsman out there who made this teacup, and it is different than other teacups or mugs or whatever else, right? That I would have. They are very unique and particular sort of items, and that's part of what makes them like interesting, right? But at the end of the day, the only thing that is unique or interesting about the items that I make outside of their quality is there's a little tag at the bottom that says made by Baron, right?
yeah, no, I mean, and part of this too is like, even with mass market produced things, right? Like, I watch a lot of tool videos online. It's like, Makita versus like, or I guess Makita versus like Milwaukee, I think are like approximately the same band of tool, right? Like they have their advantages and disadvantages, right? But like one, those are rarely quantified. You'll find people who do doing that quantification work, but much more of that sales reputation is based on like reputation and feeling, right? Like I'm a Milwaukee guy, like I'm bought into that system or whatever, and I believe in Milwaukee because my dad used Milwaukee, or like my first tool was in Milwaukee, or I like the color blue, or I think Milwaukee's red. I think Makita's,
Milwaukee is red, yeah.
yeah, Milwaukee's red, Makita's blue, right? Red's my favorite color, so I'm a Milwaukee guy, and like I have maybe some belief that it's a superior product, even if the facts don't bear that out necessarily, or even if the facts put it at a wash with an equivalent brand, um, or like
Or that I don't even like, so for instance, one of the things I did over the weekend was I bought a new controller. I bought a new controller for my like a new Xbox controller for my PC, right? And I had the option to get a third party controller, right? And I'm sure that those third party controllers are quality. They're definitely cheaper, right? The third party controllers are 35 bucks. If I get the official Microsoft one, it was 80 bucks, right? But you know what? I paid 80 bucks. And the reason why is because I didn't want to fuck with it. I just wanted the most reliable thing. And I know that Microsoft is going to make the most reliable product for what I'm looking for. It is their system. They're making the Xbox. I'm looking for an Xbox controller that'll work with my PC. I can't go wrong with this. And there is a certain amount of effort and time I would have to take in order to go, well, is this third party if this third party controller crafter, right, crafter, whatever, company
manufacturer, yeah.
reputable or not, right? Like, is it going to break down on me? What are people saying about it? Is there going to be some kind of like stick? Like, I don't even want to dig into the answers to those questions. I just want the reliable thing without having to dedicate any brain power to this. And I'm apparently willing to pay a $45 premium in order to guarantee that, right? And I think that like these are all sorts of decisions that kind of get hammered out when it comes to
A system,
the
right?
the virtual system in
Right.
World of Warcraft.
Like even if you had like Makita shoulders and Milwaukee shoulders in the game, the differences between those would be numbers that you would see on the screen, and you would pick the one you wanted based on that, not based on kind of this like quasi faith thing that like kind of like works in the real world.
Yep.
Yeah. So makes me sad because like crafting things is a cool idea, and I think like maybe there's some room for like some of that stuff, and it'd have to be like all like personalization, right? Like um, you'd have to like allow like custom art or something, and have be like I got you know, but that's like a whole minefield that
Yeah,
would.
something I was thinking is like maybe I get to name my own item, or I get to choose like like a cosmetic or something like that. Like I can give the item some sort of like particularities in the way that it like looks on a character or something like that. But at the end of the day, like all that stuff seems kind of crazy to me in terms of the expectations that someone might have for a piece of crafted gear. Anything mechanical will immediately just be hammered out on Wowhead, right?
Mhm.
For instance, okay, so another piece of this, right? You could maybe make the other end of this workout by increasing the value of crafted gear, right? And I would actually say that crafted gear is insanely valuable right now, but that there is a huge sort of, one of the things we talk about is overhead, right? Overhead is a game design term for the amount of knowledge required in order to engage with a system. So, for instance, League of Legends famously has a ton of overhead, right? Because in order to engage with League of Legends at a sort of reasonable level, right, which we would say is kind of going into solo queue and playing rank, you need to understand every single champion and what they do, right? You need to have a basic understanding of, okay, this is Lux, she shoots this, this, and this, right? This is Blitzcrank, you want to dodge his hooks or whatever, right? And part of the process that goes into teaching people League of Legends when you are introducing someone to the game is you are showing them this character for the very first time, and you're going, okay, for this guy, you want to do X, Y, and Z, right? All of this is overhead, right?
Yeah, no, and weird. Funnily enough, like we played WoW for or not WoW, League of Legends for years, and we would have to re get the overhead because like they added a bunch of champions, reworked a bunch that we don't know
Yeah,
about, right? So like
systems, right? You know, for instance, there's like the different elemental dragons that influence the map in different ways. There's a Chemtech dragon now. I don't even know. I don't pay attention to this stuff. It pops on my Twitter every once in a while, right? But these are all sort of systems that have
yeah,
kind of popped into the game, that someone needs to get to the bottom of in order to like properly interface with, you know, a game of League of Legends, right now, if I were to walk into the game, I would have to learn a certain number of new champions because they came out after I quit, and I don't know what they do or how they work or any of that sort of stuff. Okay, so that aside, um there's overhead in the crafting order system that I think is keeping people from using it, which is that crafted items are very good, but the system itself is really complex, and people aren't trained in order to go to crafters to get high quality gear, right? Like, for instance, I have a lot of friends who are very high quality players, right? My friend Dave is one of the best players that I know. Dave, don't clip this, but Dave is one of the best players that I know, and he really enjoys Mythic Plus. He mediumly enjoys raiding. Right, raiding is pretty fun. He likes going and killing the bosses for the first time, sort of thing. Um, Obviously, the game needs to still support getting loot from those places, right? From those bosses, and so there's a lot of time and effort that gets put into, you know, building out the trinkets, the loot tables, all that stuff for those bosses. And for those people, why do I need to learn about crafting orders? Why don't I just wait until it drops off the boss, right? I'll pull it out of my great vault. What does a crafting order have to do with this, right? And the real technical answer is crafting orders are probably best in slot for most people in most sort of like non sort of tier slots, right? Because number one, crafting orders can guarantee the best secondary stats for you. So that, you know, this is something people are really hyper focused on. What are my most important secondary stats? Well, I can deterministically determine those with crafted gear, right? And number two, the crafted gear scales with quality, right? Into pretty high item levels. So an average piece of heroic item level gear, right? If I'm walking into the heroic raid, is actually going to be worse than the best piece of crafted gear I could get if I got a really good crafted to get me a rank 5 of something, right? But a lot of people just don't know this stuff, right? They don't understand, you know, how useful it is. Um, and I think part of that is also designed into the system. And it's designed into the system from the ground up because I think the WoW designers know what it was like when they mandated people use legendaries, essentially, right? And how there was that this kind of insane blocker to getting into, you know, to getting into the game because you had legendaries that people needed to go buy off of, you know, the auction house in order to get that, you know, in order to get that stuff done. And I just think that all of that kind of compounds into a series of problems for ultimately, like, at the end of the day, being, you know, a very skilled, very talented crafter on your server.
yeah. No, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. They're trying so hard to avoid the problems of like crafted legendaries and like all this like market stuff that they've basically neutered the entire system, right?
Hmm.
Um, like like because you know you're saying right like you know those slots are probably like non tier slots are probably best in slot, right? If that was like known and trained or like was available on the auction house, right? Then all of a sudden it becomes mandatory, like you like to talk about, right?
Yep.
To go buy all that stuff off the auction house, and all of a sudden the game's pay to win, and you know, and it's Diablo Immortal all over again. Brr, 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 brr,
Yeah, it is
discourse forever.
honestly crazy to me that this has not been sort of like figured out. Because when I look at the system, that's what I see. I don't understand how people aren't going, "Oh, I see. I take four pieces for my tier. I take 2 pieces for embellishments. Embellishments are the really desirable crafted pieces of crafted gear, by the way, right? You can have a crafted piece of gear with an embellishment. That embellishment typically represents a little bit extra, right? So, for instance, I have 2 embellished pieces. One is legs that give me haste the first time I damage something. And it is a belt that will do a certain amount of damage. It puts a dot on people, basically. And when they die, they leave a little slow field underneath their feet. Um, so you have your 4 pieces of tier, your 2 embellishments, right? Well, that still leaves a bunch of other pieces of gear for you to sort of like fill out as necessary. And I think at the end of the day, most of those slots probably ought to be filled out with crafted gear, right? Outside of maybe trinkets, because trinkets are very particular, and there are sometimes weapons that have unique effects that don't want to do this, right? So, for instance, there's a sword in Noku Defensive that's called Strike Twice that is a one-handed sword and it just has a chance on hit to attack a second time. This is really good. It's the best sword that any one-handed strength wielder can use, right? If I'm a Frost Death Knight, I really want Strike Twice. If I'm a Protection Warrior, I really want Strike Twice, right? There's some of those pieces of gear, but just like outside of that, boy, it would be really nice. It would be really good if I could, show up and sort of like pull these pieces of sort of crafted gear that are perfectly suited and statted for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. Um, but I think the reason people haven't figured it out is because like it requires another person, right? Like, and it requires like a significant time investment, right?
Yep.
Like you can't just get yourself there. Like, I bet you it'll be like a couple weeks from now, even before people are like able to consistently put out high quality gear in the right slots, right? Like, or it's going to be has to have to be people working together. Like, I was thinking about this, right? Like, I'm thinking about trying to do some of this stuff myself. It's like, well, in order to get the best quality components, in order to make the best quality, like my goggles, right? I need to put like I'm kind of like half spread like among a bunch of trees in engineering because I want to be able to put like this. I want to be able to put the crafting enhancements on like my parts so I can make the parts better. It's like I think the way the system is supposed to be working is somebody specializes in like the combat helmets and somebody specializes in the parts, and then the combat helmets person buys the parts from the parts person, and then he's able to make the best thing, and then everybody contributes to the ecosystem. But the problem is, I think, is one, I don't think anybody wants to be the fucking parts guy. Nobody wants to be the guy who makes like the best fucking, flux capacitors or whatever, or arc flux capacitors or whatever, right? Like that's fucking boring, right? And and two, like you said, I don't think people are trained like that, right? Like
Yep.
if people are trained for interdependence, it's only in between professions, right? Like I think I think there's like 4 or 5 engineers in our guild. I think we all went the same tree first because it's the fun tree, right? It's the tree with all the toys in it, right? Um,
I get this 100%. I leveled 3 blacksmiths back to back to back. For solely for this reason. So okay, so to explain this, and this, by the way, I think is another sort of failure of the system, which is that because you're so gated on your points, but you receive the lion's share of your points up front, right? You receive a huge amount of points kind of right off the bat. I went armor smithing on Baron, I went weaponsmithing on Tonrik, and then I leveled up a third character who is my demon hunter Ire, who I just kind of leveled him as a lark. I was like, I want to do fun stuff on Alliance, and I want to tank on Alliance. This is before cross faction in Shadowlands, so I leveled a character to 60. He's a demon hunter. He's a demon hunter tank. He's night elf. And I was like, okay, what of my level 60 characters does not have a profession that I can give blacksmithing so that I can specialize him to make the alloys that I need for armor smithing and weaponsmithing? Because the cool thing is to make your own weapons, is to make your own armor, right? But you need the really high quality alloys in order to do that. So I ended up leveling these 3 different blacksmiths, all specializing in different pieces of the blacksmithing tree in order to kind of get there. I absolutely think that nobody wants to be the parts guy. And honestly, I'm sitting here and I'm tempted to do the same thing. I have a jewel crafter. I was like, I want a jewel crafter. I want to level up a jewel crafter, someone who I can go, okay, if I need an epic gem, I can just make it myself. If I need a good gem here, I can just make it myself, right? This is my mage Kruva. Uh, but in order to make the best epic gems, you need to have the base component gems, right? And the way to do that is to level up your prospecting tree, right? And so I'm like, okay, am I going to level up a jewel crafter just so I can max out the prospecting tree so that I can send them all of the ore to prospect to make the best gems to then send to the guy to cut the gems into the gems that I want for. It's like, controlling all pieces of that process is like a fucking nightmare, right? Um,
Yeah,
and maybe that's the point. Is it's supposed to be a nightmare so that you aren't self-sufficient, so that you have to engage with other people. You have to buy this stuff off the auction house. Sure, I guess, but
I
I don't
think
know.
that's the idea, but like the fantasy of the fucking game, the fantasy of being a blacksmith is building your own fucking sword from scratch, right?
Yeah,
Like, you don't like, even if I, was okay with like, going to, I don't know, like Savadar and being like, make me the fucking best arc flux capacitors because and I don't think he specialized in that tree either, but like, even if I was okay with that, like, who's gonna fucking bother, right? Like, that's why I said, like, in a couple weeks, people like have enough points that like they'll be able to do most of it themselves, and then maybe the system will come alive, and maybe they'll learn the lesson that it just doesn't fucking
yeah.
work,
Okay,
right?
so we don't have a ton of time left, but I did want to end on a hopeful note. For a while, I was actually kind of against the hate train on work orders, mostly because they were working out for me personally, and I didn't really see it from the other side. Like I said, I leveled Tonrik and Baron to 100 blacksmithing, and it was honestly just because I think one thing that people don't quite understand when it comes to this stuff is how often you need to check the table. Um, I was checking the table constantly in order, basically like every 10 or 15 minutes. If I'm in a meeting, I might log in and just check the table and then leave myself logged in, and every 10 minutes after that just check the table, check the table, check the table. That's sort of where I caught, a lot of these crafting orders, which is how I was able to level Baron all the way to max, and how I was able to level Tunrick all the way to max. And one of the interesting pieces of that kind of ended up being this feeling of uh you just sort of have to like be there and put the time into it, and it'll sort of like work out. But eventually I sort of read enough and talked to enough people that I kind of like understood the other half of things. But I do think that as the season progresses, we will sort of see an expansion of the system, because the big time gate right now for a lot of people are sparks of imagination, right? And primal chaos. And basically, as people start engaging with alts, and as they have the ability to go get sparks of imagination right off the bat and start farming up primal chaos in order to put in crafting orders for pretty powerful gear um for their alts, I actually think that you might end up seeing a pretty big expansion in the demand for work orders, because counterintuitively, that is what happened in Shadowlands. I didn't actually make most of my money selling legendaries at the beginning of a patch. I would make huge, huge amounts right up front, right? So, for instance, I sold that 400k legs, right? But really, the thing is, it was the long tail that was making me money on those legendaries. It was listing legendaries for the season, and the season lasted 8 months long, right? Um, and it's because as the season progresses, as people sort of near the end of sort of the logarithmic scale of gear, they start playing alts and leveling alts, and they want to get those alts geared. And now we're going to be seeing alts who have less barriers to.
Buddy, who dropped internet? Was it me or him? I think it's him. All right, well, folks at home, we are going to try and get him back. Oh, what? All right, so, anyway, the folks at home, um, we are going to vamp for a little bit. Um, Suffice to say that I think I agree with Buddy that in the future, that these things that this is going to get better. I hope at least, right? Like I said, in a couple of weeks, people will come online with their ability to like craft their own gear, and there'll be more demand. I think he's right about that. People will have there'll be more demand for the space. I still think there are going to be problems with pricing because people aren't going to be able to deal with that. Um, but yeah, I think Buddy's right. It's good to end on a hopeful note. Um, uh, oh, oh,
Okay,
you back?
sorry, my Discord crashed.
Uh,
Okay, here we go. Where's my thing?
uh,
I am going. You
sorry.
can. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get my camera set up.
No, yeah, yeah. So I basically what I told the audience at home is that I also think it's hopeful. I think between my arguments about people having enough skill points online to do everything themselves and your arguments about the supply increasing, that maybe it'll get better soon. Uh, and I think that's probably a good place to end that particular discussion, unless you wanted to finish out your thought.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention is that there are actually going to be some changes coming into the game. Most notably, they are drastically reducing the amount of public work orders that any single person can fulfill. It's 4. I think it's 4 a
Ooh,
week. Which
ooh,
does seem kind of insane to me. And we'll sort of see where that goes. It might mean that, it might mean a couple of things. It might mean that players uh, save their work orders for more value, right? Crafters, I mean. So right now, because the work orders are essentially kind of, most people aren't going to hit their limit in the work orders. I think a lot of people just clear them,
as they
just
see
clear
them.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah. But if I only have 4 a week that I'm willing to spend, I'm probably not going to take a 100 gold commission to make explorers, trainer, whatever,
yeah.
like bracers or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Which I do think is pretty interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, that does that apply to personal orders as well, or just the public orders? I have not.
Not personal orders, just public orders,
Okay,
which I
that
think
makes
is
sense.
probably, yeah, like good for the system as a whole.
Yeah, so hopeful things to look forward to. WoW, the WoW dev team does try and make things better, so we'll see that. All right, well, given that we're at kind of the natural ending point of that, buddy, how was your week?
How was my week? My week was honestly pretty busy. We're gearing up obviously for the Rain World launch. Rain World Downpour launches on January 19th, which is this Thursday. The and so a lot of my time has just been like put into doing Rain World stuff. And honestly, I've been playing a lot of Rain World. So I've been playing a lot of Rain World sort of just to be familiar with the game and how it works. And I don't know. It's interesting. Have you ever played Rain World?
I have not, but I'm interested. Well, buddy, tell me, what platforms will Rainbow be available on? Rainbow
Just on
Downpour.
PC. We don't have to do a whole sales pitch, but I do
Okay.
appreciate it. Also, for the record, I am working on this game. It is an Akupara Games game. Like that, all of the normal sort of caveats sort of apply to all of that stuff. But yeah, so Rain World is Rain World comes out on Thursday. And so I've been playing a bunch of that. Like we did a co-op stream on Friday, which was pretty interesting and pretty fun because Raid World the game is not built for co-op, but like modders modded it in, and we have now taken that mod and made it as part of
You've
this
canonized
DLC,
it.
right? Yeah, exactly. And it's just like very fun and kind of goofy and doofy. Raid World is really interesting. It is a game that I am not sure should work as well as it does, I guess is what I would say. But there's like a lot of really neat stuff that it does, and I know that some people really like it. Obviously there's a huge community for the game who have been kind of clamoring for more Rain Worlds for a while since launch. So um I would be interested to see if you would like it or not. One of the things that I thought is very interesting and weird is that people compare it a lot to Souls-like games, even though I wouldn't say it's a Souls-like. And it came out in 2017, which was kind of before like the really big sort of surge in Souls-likes. This would have been in Dark Souls 2, so it would have been like people would have been interested in it. I think they would have been on board, and it would have been, or maybe Dark Souls 3 actually.
Yeah, I think it is 3.
Dark Souls 3,
March 24th, 2016. So
yeah, 2016. Okay, yeah, it was Dark Souls 3. Obviously, I think it has kind of come into its own now, as as Elden Ring has hit new insane heights. But 2016 would have been, or 2017 would have been right after Bloodborne, right after Dark Souls 3, right as it's kind of kicking into gear. There's no Souls mechanic, there's no currency to it, right? The whole point of the game is that you are playing an animal in this sort of simulated ecosystem, and there's a lot of different rules on how that ecosystem works, and you have to sort of intuit a lot of those sorts of things, and kind of explore them. And there's a little bit of platforming and kind of combat involved. But I actually think that the thing that makes Rain World so sort of special is how immersive in existing in that ecosystem really is, just on a pure gameplay level, right? How just kind of treating yourself as as both hunter and prey is just a really fun, exhilarating sort of experience. Because there are these, I was playing with Rachel. We were playing two very combat focused. They're called slug cats, or the sort of species, right? There's one slug cat called the Spearmaster, who spawns bone spears out of his tail, and then he can throw those bone spears at a target, and when he hits, he gets food out of that, right? He leeches food out of the target. So he's very combat focused, because the only way that he eats is by landing spears on powerful predators, right? And then there's the Artificer, who can take a spear and turn it into an explosive spear with food. And so playing those two together meant that we were playing a lot of explosive spears, and we could really go for some of the most powerful sort of predators in the game. But it was just the first time that a creature called a vulture, which is this huge thing, appeared and attacked us, and we killed it. It was absolutely insane. And we actually got two vultures at the exact same time, and we were freaking out about it, because it's such a dangerous creature. Anyway, I don't know. I think all of that kind of compounds to be really interesting, and really kind of complex, when it comes to a game. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on Rain World and Downpour, if you would give it a chance.
I will endeavor to give it a chance at some point in the near future.
Yeah, I said that the game I want to do a full podcast episode on is Estrella, but I would maybe do a whole episode on Rain World.
That makes sense. On my end of things, I've been playing a lot of WoW, as we've been talking about. What things have come up? We're going pretty hard actually on solo shuffle, which has inevitably led to me being aggravated, partially because of my own stupidity. I didn't realize Conquest was the thing you could max out, and I realized I was winning for a bit, and I was like, oh boy, I'm doing well, and then I started losing. Or then I bought a weapon with Conquest, and I started losing, and then I realized that the weapon I had bought was an int weapon, and an int weapon doesn't go on my Windwalker Monk. So not only do I have a weapon that isn't statted for me, but that's 1,350 Conquest that I can't get back.
Yeah, you were just out. Oh,
yeah.
That is rough.
Yeah. Well, I have also started learning about the other frustrations of solo shuffle, the last game I played, which was this morning, I was the top ranked player going into the match, and then I guess enough people left that the match ended early. But I won 3 out of 4, and I got no rating change. And that happens, right? That's if you are the top of the ratings pile in your particular match, you have to win all of them to go, or it depends on the spread, but it is hard to go up, and so much is out of your control that sometimes you don't win because your healer is not great, and yes, that sounds salty, and it kind of is, but sometimes it happens, right? Sometimes you lose the match or one of the people in your group doesn't have a lot of health, or isn't particularly well geared, or they just forgot or something, and the way that solo shuffle works, I don't know how 2s and 3s works, but in shuffle, if once one person goes down, the round is over, and the team that with the person that went down, it's gone, it's done, right? And so like it's fun to strategize around that. Like, we're going to target the squishy hunter and try and burst him down real fast before like anybody can react to it, right? And that works sometimes. But that's also frustrating if you're on the receiving end of it, right? If you're like, the warrior who's along for the ride and is perfectly competent, but just can't like, pull people off of the hunter, right? Like, so, but that's fun. I am enjoying that still. So I've been doing a bunch of that. I've also been splitting time between the new God of War and Tunic, which is a Metroidvania. That I started. I got myself a Steam Deck for Christmas, and I was playing it over the holidays. Steam Deck is nice. I partially bought it to use to play WoW on remotely, and that kind of works. But like running WoW on the Steam Deck is like not a guaranteed endeavor. It's like I'm not getting much better performance out of it than I was out of my old laptop, which is disappointing, but like it's kind of the nature of the beast. It's not like I bet you if I played it on the Steam Deck with like a controller mod, it would work better. Or even if I just plugged in like a keyboard and a mouse but just played it on the tiny Steam Deck screen instead of like projecting it out onto a monitor, it would work better. But that seems painful. But like Tunic is super fun little Metroidvania. The new God of War is fun, but like apparently like incredibly large and probably gonna take me a while to get through it. The only other thing of interest I think I've done is I've watched 7 of the 8 episodes of the first season of The Boys, which is an interesting show. I'm enjoying it, but my initial impression is that you're smirking. I assume you have opinions.
No, I'm interested. I want to hear what you think, bud. Let's go.
So my impression of it is this is going to sound weird, but it reminds me of Avatar Way of Water because it is more concerned with being an edgy parody than it is in doing cogent world building. And so like Avatar Way of Water is more concerned with its meta message of like being like edgy than it is. Avatar Way of Water, I think, was more concerned with his meta message. Of
it's not message. I get exactly what you mean, though, right?
Yeah.
It's concerned with this message, not with this world building.
Yeah. And so there are things that in like the world of that show that like make absolutely no sense for me. Also, I know the comic came out in like the 9/11 era, and it's very fucking clear, right? Like I was like, oh, I heard it had been updated for the modern age, and there's some of that, but a lot of it's kind of like, oh yeah, there are terrorists and the government wants to, do stuff with like there's like very 9/11 thing there. Like fucking Billy Butcher like goes off at like a religious superhero or whatever. And I'm like, wow, that's like like mid-aughts Reddit atheist talk right there, right? Like
yep. Yeah, I mean, I liked The Boys, but my thing with The Boys, like it was very head empty. I actually don't think I think it is not concerned with the message. I think it's concerned with a vibe, really.
Yeah,
it's
that's what I mean.
No thoughts, head empty.
Yeah,
right.
It's concerned with being an edgy parody more than it's concerned with.
I don't think it actually has thoughts in its brain. I don't think it's actually making any kind of statement about superheroes outside of just what if Superman was a sociopath? And it's like, okay, I guess I actually like it on those terms. Right. But it's sort of in the same way that I would like, I don't know. It's a good example of this.
Well, I mean, so it's kind of like, it's not even like, what if Superman was a sociopath? It's like, what if like South Park level commentary on like George Bush did 9/11, but with superheroes, right? Like,
yeah. Okay, yeah, actually, yeah. And the first season is interesting. The second season, I think, does have a little bit more on its mind, but is ultimately kind of also stupid and dumb for reasons that I wouldn't be able to get into without any kind of spoilers or whatever. I have not seen the third season. I want to, though. So I think I will eventually, sit down and watch the third season of The Boys, because like I said, I do think it is a good show. It's just a very dumb show. It's sort of stupid. It's Patrick Willems called Zack Snyder a himbo auteur because he has a really great eye for visual style. but he doesn't really have cogent thoughts in his brain, right? He is mostly just sort of this visual stylist. I would say that's wrong. I think that Zack Snyder does have thoughts in his brain, but you have to just kind of be like a weird person on his wavelength in order to interpret them, I guess, or whatever. But I think that would be the way that I would describe The Boys. It's a very himbo show.
No, so honestly, that's actually spot on, because I thought there's like some fucking fantastic shots in the show, right? Like there's a shot where like Maeve and Homelander are like sitting on a bench, and there's just like a tree in between them, right? Or like the shot where Billy Butcher drives his car into the shop, which is like enough of a not spoiler, right? Like that's a really cool fucking shot, right? Like it's like a lot of like as my girlfriend likes to call it, the cinnamon topography is very good in The Boys. So I love that aspect.
By the way, that's cinematography, I'm assuming.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Okay. The cinnamon topography. That's actually really funny. That's actually a really good joke. Yeah. No, that's exactly how I feel, right? That's exactly how I feel. It looks pretty, but it's dumb as hell. It's a himbo, right?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, maybe that changes in the third season, right? Obviously, The Boys got a lot of credit in its first 2 seasons, and I would not be surprised if it got smarter as it went on, right? God, I can't believe I'm about to make this take. That's sort of what happened to Rick and Morty, right? Where the first 2 seasons were basically just kind of on this very low level, this sort of like low level like parody of Back to the Future science fiction story sort of stuff. But then in the third season, it actually did get a little bit more complex, kind of talking about how, self-destructive like Rick's like cool guy, smart guy life is, and how actually he's sort of a piece of shit that everyone hates and should hate because he's a piece of shit. It's like that sort of maturation could happen in the third season. I just don't know yet. But those first 2 seasons were pretty fucking stupid. Anyway, so
yeah, no, like I don't know. So this isn't like a huge spoiler, but like just like in terms of like the like went to the fridge and is like what the fuck is even happening type of deal, like the fridge moment, it's like one of the arcs is the company at the center of the show is trying to get superheroes into the military. And this isn't even like a fridge moment. This is like me sitting there and it's like, there is literally no way in any world that the fucking United States government is going to let superheroes be the sole domain of a single private company, right? Like I don't care. Like that's what I mean in terms of like, South Park level, like early aughts, like takes on things. Is like, and then the evil company does the thing. It's like, that there's no way. And even if I accept that there are private contractor superheroes out there, I don't believe for a second that there are a bunch of supes out there, right? You're telling me there isn't one superhero who like voluntarily joined the military because he believes in his country, right? Like, I get that doesn't fit with the political commentary of the show, but it's just like boggles belief that like, there's no organic superhero in the military that's like doing things, right? Like a Captain America type character, right? Who joins the military because he loves his country or whatever. So yeah, like those are the types of things that just like leap out of me as like mind-bogglingly mind-bogglingly unlikely. And then like again, to your point, I'm not going to go into spoilers, but then, like some of the aspects of the plot are like, this seems very convoluted and not a thing that I think would act like, like what's the actual plan here, guy, right? Like, but it's a fun watch. Yep. It is definitely a fun
watch. It's definitely a fun watch.
Love Carl Urban. Even though Billy Butcher as a character makes me mad, love Carl Urban.
Billy Butcher as a character makes you mad?
Just because so that is the point, right? Like he makes several decisions that are stupid, but like that's the point, right? Like that he's like a jackass, right? Like, but like but that's why like he makes me mad as a character because he's supposed to make me mad as a character, right? And so, bravo. But it's also one of those things where like I'm pretty sure there's one character that's like pretty unambiguously good, and I'm pretty sure he's gonna have to die at some point because that's the type of show this is. I will see. Yeah.
Shit. All right. Well, all right. Who is the character that is unambiguously good?
Mother's Milk.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
He's like, he's level-headed. He's nice. he's always trying to do the right thing, right? Like, unlike everybody else who's like got their who's, I mean, I guess maybe Starlight, but like she's not, she's like she's on a kind of different track, but like, like he seems like Mother's Milk seems like the kind of like tragedy bait. He's got a wife and kid, right? But it's got a bunch of cool cameos, right? Like Haley Joel Osment showed up, and I'm like, oh, I recognize that guy. So but it's a fun show.
Okay, fair enough.
Fun fact: the guy that plays Translucent plays the father in Violent Night.
Okay, I did not know that. I thought Translucent was played by Sacha Baron Cohen.
No, he's played by like
I might be just like
so
fucking insanely stupid.
Weirdly, this show has a lot of people that I look at like, is that person? And it's not, right? Like the one of the marketing guys, the guy who he's like in like the Collateral Damage Survivors group. I was like, is that Dave Chappelle? And it's not, but it looked like him for a second. And so like there's a bunch of people like that in this show where I like blink twice and it's like, oh no, it's not actually the famous person.
Okay, yeah, he was not in that. Yeah, for some reason I just really thought that was Sacha
like,
Baron Cohen. But
Huey's dad is Simon Pegg with an American accent, which is like a trip.
oh god, yeah, that's weird. Ooh, boy, are we allowed? Do you want to talk about the Harry Potter thing? Simon Pegg got in all up in that over the weekend. He plays the
honestly, so you tweeted about it, and I tweeted back about how like I don't think any of this drama actually matters to the success of the game because I don't think Twitter's real life, but I don't like Harry Potter as like a world, so I just don't care, right?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, I actually think the ethics of it are more fraught than they seem on its face. I don't know, maybe people get mad at me for that sort of take or whatever. But like it's just real complicated to sort of boil things down to sort of, are you giving money to a bad person who like theoretically like owns this whole thing? And I'm watching people play these like really complicated moral games about it, and I'm just like, guys, I don't know that like you're going to be able to get to the bottom of this in a sort of like in a satisfactory way. But I also want them to be right because I do think J.K. Rowling is transphobic. I don't like her or Harry Potter or this game, or I guess everything I've seen about this game. It could be an amazing game, and I just like don't fucking know or whatever. And so like I sort of want them to be right, but I feel like I'm watching bad arguments take place. And so there's the part of me that agrees with sort of the underlying sort of like drive that these people are expressing, and then there's the part of me that wants to like, well, actually, if I were to steel man the other side, this is a bad argument.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And like,
yeah,
I don't particularly like, I'm not going to go into the political end of things. I don't know enough about the J.K. Rowling thing to care because I don't like Harry Potter. Like, this is the weird thing is like, I tend to be a little bit more free speech absolutist than you do, right? I don't know the full details of what she said, but I also like initially thought she was a fucking coward when she was like Dumbledore's gay after the fact, right? And I also,
oh my god, tell me about it.
And like I also always thought like that the goblins were like weirdly like kind of like that's like not just a J.K. Rowling thing, right? Like the Ferengi in Star Trek are also kind of like weirdly maybe Jews, right? Yep. Like and so like I don't know, I always thought it was like people decided to pay attention because something else happened, right? Like I always thought Harry Potter was dumb, right? Like we've talked about one of the problems I have with Quidditch as like as a sport, right? Like
yeah.
But I also think that like you go into any of like you're like, what if the money goes to a bad person, right? Well, like I'm sure that there's somebody at every single company at every single piece of thing that you own that has done something bad and or has like a negative consequence.
No, this is the thing that I said. I said this about Blizzard, about the WoW stuff, which was nobody cares if a pedophile slices their bread, and it's not because they don't care about giving money to pedophiles. It's because they don't care about bread, right? The only reason anybody cares about any of this is because they're paying attention to it and like looking at it. But the reality is the world is going to be full of evil, terrible people who do evil, terrible things. And there is no amount of, investigation that could go into understanding the contours of each and every like piece of that, right? And that, yeah, like that's
Yeah.
a complicated sort of like thing to sort of navigate, which is why I sort of think that really on a moral level you can't break this stuff down, right?
Yeah.
Because it is like impossible to sort of square all of the ethics away.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, there's tons of people that are going to do evil things that are not related to the work they do, whether that work is like consequential or maybe part of the message, right? Like, J.K. Rowling is closely identified, like, is the author of the Harry Potter books, right? Like, if she was like a cafeteria lunch lady, would you not want to eat the food she put on the tray, right? Like, obviously, there's a more personal connection there's more personal connection between someone who writes a book than like a server at a restaurant, but like, or like, the classic example is like suicide next at Foxconn for the people who make iPhones, right? Like, how morally culpable are you when you purchase an iPhone?
Yep.
How morally,
Yeah, and I think that all of that, it's just it's hard to get away with it. But at the end of the day, I guess I sort of respect the drive to justice, right?
Sure.
Because I definitely do, like there's a ContraPoints video where she talks about J.K. Rowling stuff, and I like that video a lot because it really does the work of sitting down, going through the points, and showing in no uncertain terms how what she's saying is both false, like fundamentally untrue, and discriminatory, right? Fundamentally bigoted towards trans people, right? And she does it with a weird amount of empathy and sort of compassion, right? In order to sort of like prove that point. So it doesn't like I don't need it proven to me that J.K. Rowling is a person with some terrible views, with whom I would vehemently disagree, right? Obviously I have a lot of friends who are trans who I'm sure would be really offended if I were to say I think J.K. Rowling has some good points about whatever it is. She's just gender critical, right? Like that kind of a thing.
Yep.
But I think the problem is taking that from this person is a person who says stuff that I disagree with and is bigoted and discriminatory, right? And the work this person is doing, right, is is not worthy of money just because things get so gummed up in sort of this quagmire of ethics. Like for instance, if the team gets a bonus, right? Like if the team at whatever game studio published this, if they get a bonus if the game does well, does the moral righteousness of the individual people on that team, let's say they're all really good people, outweigh the moral detriment of putting the money in her pocket? I don't know, right? Like I don't know. But the other thing I return to is the thing that you talked about, which was at the time with the Blizzard stuff. You said I uninstalled my BattleNet, right? Because all it did for me was brought awareness of the issue, and it was a pretty low effort thing for me to just get this off on my computer because I didn't want to be associated with it. And in another controversy that I wanted to ask your opinion about, I did the same thing, which is the D&D stuff. Have you seen the stuff with the OGL, the open games license?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know.
I had a D&D Beyond subscription and I had forgotten about it. It was one of those things you sign up, you use it a little, you forget about it or whatever. But all this stuff with the OGL, it made me go, oh, what? I remember that. Yeah, okay. Boom. And I cut it off because I don't, first of all, I don't use it, but also secondly, I don't support the proposed direction of the OGL that was sort of being talked about, especially because of how foundational that era and form of D&D was sort of to my interest in tabletop. So how does all of that square for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think part of it has to be that like if this leak means that you will never play D&D again, then like there's like no like Hasbro has backpedaled on this, right? Which I think is good.
Yeah.
And I think at some level maybe you as an individual don't, but like some people have to be willing to give them credit for that, because otherwise there's like no point, right? Like, otherwise I might as well go ahead with the OGL 1.1 as proposed, because it's not going to make a difference, right? But I mostly play Pathfinder anyway. They've released, or they have not released a license yet, but they have announced they're going to release their own license called the Orc, which is funny. That's also going to be an open license. Kind of from that perspective, I've read some articles about like Electronic Frontier Foundation. I'll try and link it in the description, about how like you probably don't actually need the OGL for most of the stuff that most people do with it anyway. And like by accepting the OGL, you're actually limiting yourself more than you would if you just had no license, like you had no license attached to it, right? Like,
really?
So part of it is that like a lot, like you can't copyright game mechanics, right? Like,
yeah.
And so like the thing that the OGL basically gets you is the ability to put like compatible with 5e on your game, and like maybe that's not even true, right? Like you might even be able to do that anyway, because like that's like an aspect of fair use. I'm not a lawyer, so don't quote me on it. I will try and link this Electronic Frontier Foundation article in the description where the person who is a lawyer goes into it more. But like, first, like, but like, I know a little bit about this copyright stuff. One, because it's an interest of mine, and two, it's like big in like the open source software community, and like there are a bunch of licenses out there that could apply to, like, they're meant for software, but you can apply them easily to a lot of different things. There's kind of like, you can use this for free, just attribute, or like, you use it for free, but it can't be for commercial. And if you use this in a derivative work, you must also include this license called copyleft, right? Like the self-perpetuating license. Like if you use the thing in here, you also have to apply this license. You must use this license in the thing that's derived from it, and it has its own conditions on it, and falls down the chain. Some of them allow for commercial use. It's the Creative Commons is the name of is the set of licenses. I'm not sure exactly how they apply to non-software things. I know that they do apply to non-software things, or there are ways to apply them.
Yeah, I do know how Creative Commons, because this is game. This is just a thing I know from games where people will release source code.
Yeah.
And under a Creative Commons license, right? We had a game like that was like that we actually had to take off of that license because of. Or I'm sorry, not take off that license. We released a product that would normally have had the license, but we couldn't use the license because it included proprietary code from one of our console partners. And we sent it to their legal team and we said, hey, listen, this is a game that is normally open source under a Creative Commons license, but technically we have some code in here that is built to interface, because it was a console port that's built to interface with your console. Is it okay for us to include that in the open source? And they said no, because that code, that specific piece of their code is copyrighted, and they don't want that under a Creative Commons license, which I thought was a really interesting edge case that I had never encountered before. But yeah,
so, and you'll have things like this happen where like people will they'll release the code, but they'll have stubbed out all the proprietary things, right? So that like this is where that code would go. It doesn't work. Doesn't matter because you're not loading it onto your console because you're an individual consumer or whatever, right? Like, or it's kind of like, but like that's obviously more work and people generally don't want to do that. But that's why good encapsulation is important, right? Like why it's
I feel like I should. Lou says in the chat, I watched a lawyer talk about this on YouTube. I actually kind of do want to do that. Weirdly, I have been obsessed with lawyers talking about something completely different. But like when the OGL stuff happened, I just saw it immediately and I was just like, I wonder if I have a D&D Beyond account, because it did sound like something. I was like, did I sign up for this? And I did, and it was just the inkling of it was enough to get me to get rid of it. I thought that the issue that they were going after, see, to me, the third party publishers was the thing, obviously, but I thought the thing was Critical Role. I thought when I first saw this, I was like, oh my god, they're going after Critical Role, right? Because Critical Role is using D&D, making all this money, obviously. And this is something you and I have talked about in the past, where technically streaming a game, like, you should get a license, like a specific sort of license for that, right? But like no one has ever really pulled that lever because of how detrimental it would probably be. And I was like, oh my god, are we actually like doing this? But that was just my like gut reaction, right?
people do pull those levers, right? Like, like certain, like Nintendo's famous for pulling those levers, like
Yeah,
Atlas
that
with
is
Persona
true.
5, yeah, like pulls that lever all the time. There was like the controversy where like Firewatch specifically banned PewDiePie from streaming the game, which is like a weird thing to do, but which is funny because they had to specifically revoke his license because they actually have a proper streaming license in their terms of service.
Yeah, like I know we have well, our license is mostly about music because of the way that Twitch wants you to have the rights to the music that you stream.
Yeah.
So we put all of our music on that special license so that,
Right, but
yeah.
most streaming is at the largesse of the company, right? Them not enforcing their copyright
Yeah.
against you.
Yeah, so that's what I thought. I was like, "Oh, Hasbro is going after Critical Role for
They
using D&D 5e."
Probably Critical Role, maybe Paizo, maybe Cobalt Press, right? But like that's also like is also just kind of like I don't know. It is what it is. I don't, like I said, I don't play D&D as much anymore. They clearly want more control of their IP. That's like the famous thing is that it's under monetized, right? Like D&D is under monetized. And from like a certain perspective, I understand like how Hasbro might be upset that like Critical Role is literally giving them nothing, except for exposure, I guess, for like a product that's raking in like millions of dollars. But I don't know how you can control that, right? Like, and there's not really a point in it, but I think it's, yeah. I mean, I think it's bad. I just, don't know how much. So that was the other thing, right? So you were talking about like, Lou in the chat is saying that like the OGL doesn't cover as much as the community seems to think it did. And that is very true, right? Part of the problem is that the way that the civil law system works in this country is that even if they don't have a right to go after you, there's a huge deterrent effect because vindicating that right in court is expensive, right? If I wanted to sit down and write like a custom D&D 5e module and put it up there, the fear of being sued by Wizards, even though that they probably don't have a leg to stand on, might be enough, and probably is enough, for me to stop doing it. And if it isn't, them sending me a sternly worded letter is enough to get me to stop, even if they don't have a leg to stand on, right? Because if I have to actually go to court, that's going to cost me a lot of time and money that I don't have or care about, especially if I'm just doing it for fun. Right. Obviously, that's a lot of bad press for them. And obviously, they're running back on it because they know that, this is a losing issue. I thought it was funny that they tried to blame it on NFTs. Like, it felt like a very transparent kind of like, this was about NFTs. Like, sure, it was, guys. That's definitely what it was about. Now, that wasn't like an easy thing to scapegoat, right? Like, but I don't know.
As it's funny because I am in this position. I guess I could talk about this a little bit publicly. I'm in this position with Akupara, right? So, for instance, one of the things that we're doing with Rain World is we released the DLC price. The DLC price is $15, and then in February we're increasing the base price of the game from $20 to $25, right? Its decision was made, in a meeting not all that long ago, for a bunch of different reasons. But when we released that information, people went wild. People went crazy. They were like, "It's because of this. It's because of that. Oh, it's worth it. I can't believe you're so greedy," or whatever. And part of what I had to do was I had to sit down and write a response. And I basically explained, I was like, "Hey, listen, there's no one answer for why this happened. It's a couple of different things. One, the first price for the DLC was $20, but we decided that was probably too high. What we wanted to do was give people a break, so we sort of swapped $5 from whatever game to the other game. We pushed it out by a month so that anybody who buys Rain World right around the Downpour launch isn't affected by this. It's only people who buy later down the line, right? It helps offset some business costs or whatever. I just kind of outlined a couple of very basic sort of thoughts. And that worked out. People in the Rain World community like me, and basically everyone was like, okay, well, now that you explained it, right? Like I kind of get it, but boy, it's hard, right? I probably spent, a couple of hours just reading the responses, seeing what people kind of were angry about and what I wanted to address and how I wanted to talk about these sorts of things. And even the question of whether I wanted to respond at all was sort of in, because it's sort of just a business decision, right?
Yeah.
And we don't I don't like sitting and explaining internal business decisions to players. I don't think that that's like a good use of my time or their interest in our titles, obviously. And so I really get how writing that thing is hard, but I don't know. I wasn't following. I read the Wizards response. I just wasn't following the thing closely enough to really grok it though. At the end of the day, I just was not super.
Yeah,
I don't know, on top of it. So yeah.
that's perfectly fair. Like I said, I think it's a bad move on their part. You know, if I want to get like tinfoil hat, maybe they leaked it on purpose to get it to see what the reaction would be before they made an official announcement. But you know, we'll see where it goes. Obviously, I think most people are going to go. I think some people are going to go with Paizo's orc thing. I think most of them should probably go with the Creative Commons license, right? Like, there's this is an important thing in a lot of other places of the world. And I always wondered why, I wondered why Paizo had the OGL in their 2E handbooks. I thought it was because they thought they had to because of the ties. Like PF1E, it is definitely built off of PF or D&D 3.5, right?
Yeah.
And it's an even enough way that it's reasonable for them to want to like put the license in there to cover their ass. I thought they had a similar reason for putting it in the 2E, but like you don't need a license for a lot of that stuff, right? Like I said, a lot of it is just to kind of like entrap people, which is like it's not the best way to put it, but like trick people into accepting the license so that like, you know, Wizards has some control over things and like, you know, you get like some paltry amount of things for engaging with it. But yeah. But it's interesting because like Paizo announced Orc, Kobold Press announced that they were doing their own game, and like the Angry GM is like, I have to scrub all references to D&D out of my articles, and I'm gonna fast track making my own game. So you know,
Oh.
yeah. So you know, like, and I'm sure, and those are like the three things that I was paying attention to. I'm sure there's like 1,000 more that are like, you know, go play GURPS, right? Like, speaking of which, Gen Con tickets go on sale on the 29th for anybody who cares.
Oh shit. Should I do Gen Con this year? Should this be the return of Gen Con, buddy? Fuck. It's actually sort of good for me to go again because I won't be in the middle of a million releases. Thank God. Man, that's really interesting. Maybe I will go to Gen Con.
Are you going to be at PAX East?
Oh God, that's still up in the air, man. I don't even know. The question, yes, is really the answer. The question is whether I'm going with a company or whether I'm going on my own.
Okay.
I haven't gotten. I guess maybe I was just sort of getting locked into going with the company because I haven't bought it like on a personal thing or whatever. But I really should figure that out. Because I do want to go. Especially because like everybody's going to be there, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Have you heard about the? I don't want to. Did you come to the mythical like tasting kitchen dinner?
I went 2 year or the year that the pandemic started, I went to that dinner.
Okay, yeah, I think that, yeah, I also went to that dinner. Yes, that is the thing that like I was thinking. I was like, man, I just like wish I want to be able to do this, right? So you know, yeah. I am mildly hyped for PAX East. We're locking in our set. I'm actually pretty interested because we're debuting a game at PAX East, which is sort of
nice.
Neat. So yeah.
Yeah, congratulations. Well, we're way over time.
We're way over time.
All right.
Listen, I have mythics to run. Okay.
Yeah, I kind of want to. I want to run a mythic too. That way, I get at least one for my my vault and maintain my key. All right. So, if you'd like to tell us what you thought about any of the things we talked about in this episode, you can email us at nervousplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@nervousplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/nervousplaygames or youtube.com/@nervousplaygames. But you need to put that in the announcements from now on because I need to generate more YouTube clicks. I work for Google, by the way.
I work for Google, by the way.
Well, I mean, like, I should disclose that, right? Like,
yeah.
Not for YouTube, but it's related. Find us on SoundCloud. Find us on all of your podcatchers, iTunes. Rate and review us. We've got a Patreon too. All the links in the description. That's everything I have. But do you have anything else you'd like to promote?
I do have one thing I'm looking to promote tomorrow. This time tomorrow, actually, I am going to be on the Completionist stream. Gerard the Completionist. He featured Rain World in Indie Land a couple of months ago, and then wanted to do another featuring around its launch. So that's what's happening, and it just so happens that I live really nearby. So he was like, "Hey, do you want to like come hang out in the studio and we could play Downpour together?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, let's go." So tomorrow, I don't know, around 4 or 5 Pacific, we're gonna be streaming. I don't know. I'm excited to show that off. I will also be streaming on launch day. So on Rain World launch day at 9 a.m., which is the time 9 a.m. Pacific that Downpour launches, I'm going to be streaming on the Akupara Games channel. So if you want to come see me, probably play Artificer because he is my favorite of the Downpour Slugheads. You can feel free to come there. Those are the things I want to promote.
Awesome. And one last thing, because I forgot, and this is a little bit of a downer, but I have talked about, speaking of lawyer YouTubers, I have talked about YouTuber Hogue Law a bunch of times, but giving explainers. He had a stroke a couple of weeks ago. He appears to be recovering, or the updates from his wife appear that he's recovering. There is a GoFundMe to help pay for some of his stuff. I will put a link to that in the description.
Oh my God.
And I will say, as representative of some Derps Talk About Games, we wish him a speedy recovery.
Yeah.
Because I want my law news. Damn it! I don't like any of the other like game. None of
Oh
the
yeah,
game
you not like Legal? He's the big one, right?
So Legal is the big YouTube lawyer, but like the other people in like kind of like the gamer lawyer space are like Recchietta Law and like Runkle of the Bailey and like
I don't like Recchietta Law. I have not seen a lot of his stuff actually, to be fair, but the stuff I have seen seemed dumb as hell.
Yeah. And Runkle of the Bailey I think is Canadian. And so like I just a lot of people. Hogue is very wholesome. A lot of YouTube lawyers tend to be a little bit edgy.
Sure.
I also think that Legal Eagle is fairly wholesome, but like I just don't vibe with him as much. But I like Hogue, and I wish him a speedy recovery. So, with that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.